Hello everybody. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar, a first hands-on look at the new PowerBuilder 2017 R2 version. This version is hot off the press, and we're really excited to be sharing with you the new features. We're also very excited that so many of you turned up today. This is the highest turnout we've had in recent years, and we really appreciate all your enthusiasm and support around PowerBuilder. We'll be moving PowerBuilder forward in agile, innovative cycles 6 to 12 months at a time. So let's take a look at what this new installment of PowerBuilder brings us. But before we do that, I'd like to highlight for you our agenda. We'll be giving you an overview of what R2 is, outlining for you the different product additions, which is a change from the way Sybase and SAP have done it in the past. We'll be turning it over to Chris, who's going to give you a hands-on look at some of the key new features, including live demonstration. And then Chris will also give you some valuable tech advice. And finally, we'll be both joining you on a live Q&A session, so please do stay until the end, and you'll get a chance to ask us all the questions that you have. PowerBuilder 2017 R2 is low-risk, valuable upgrade in our opinion, because it's based on the time-tested PowerBuilder 12.6. 12.6 has been around for years, used by many customers. It's gone through numerous maintenance releases and fixes by SAP. And what we've done is we've taken 12.6, we've included all the latest fixes, including the latest October 2017 maintenance release number 27620. And then we've incorporated that into PowerBuilder R2. We've also had PowerBuilder 2017 on the market since June of last year. And that product has also gone through a number of bug fixes which have been incorporated in this revision. So you're really getting fixes from both sides, and it should be the most stable recent version of PowerBuilder that's available to you. Now, the other key benefit of PowerBuilder is that it's the only version that's supported on Windows 10 in 2016. There are some customers that do run older versions of PowerBuilder, but we have addressed a number of Windows 10 specific bugs. And also, as you know, with Windows 10, updates are constantly being applied and the product is morphing and changing in real time. So it's, in our opinion, quite risky to have a production application running on Windows 10 if you're not using a version of PowerBuilder that supports it. We also focus on giving some much needed enhancements. PowerBuilder R2 is a revision, so it's not going to give you any groundbreaking features, but sometimes smaller features can solve really big pains, and that's what we focused on. One of the pains we focused on is source control management. Git and SVN are two very popular source control among our customers, and PowerBuilder historically has not been able to natively integrate with that, which caused all sorts of hassles and headaches for customers. We also took a look at the SSL TLS security in PowerBuilder. Before PowerBuilder 2017, 1.2 standard was not supported. The 1.2 standard is the only secure version of TLS that's available, as well as compliant with PCI requirements. So this is available to you both in a new HTTP client, which we're introducing as a replacement for the INET object, as well as a new REST client if you're looking to make secure calls using TLS 1.2 to RESTful JSON web APIs. We're also introducing support for PostgreSQL. We saw a number of customers using this, and that was not historically supported. By Appeon officially supporting it in R2, and Chris will be outlining what are some of the key benefits you're going to get. Or if you're considering switching to PostgreSQL, then R2 is the version to do it with. We introduced a new native PDF generation feature back in 2017 as a replacement for GoScript, and we've made enhancements to that feature in R2. And there's even more. Now finally, another reason why R2 is a valuable upgrade is it paves the way for you to take your apps to the cloud. No matter it's your existing PowerBuilder project or maybe a new project that you're going to embark on. So with this cloud capability, we're starting the first step by introducing the support for consuming RESTful web APIs, as well as building in JSON data handling into the data window. So then your data windows can be powered by JSON data sources. But this is just the first step, and we'll be delivering installments with PowerBuilder 2018 and 2019 that add much more cloud features focused around C# and .NET. So in terms of product editions, we offer PowerBuilder in 3 editions that are really structured around different project needs. The standard edition is great if you're doing a typical desktop client-server app. It's going to allow you to generate 32 and 64-bit executables. It's going to provide native database drivers. You're going to be able to call web services. And PowerBuilder is offered as a subscription model, so it's all-inclusive. You're going to get a non-perpetual license to the software. You're going to get updates. You're going to get fixes. And you're going to get standard technical support. Now, the Cloud Edition is great if you're looking to develop cloud-based apps. And under that scenario, you'd be creating web services, not just consuming them. You might be creating server-side assemblies that might be used by other .NET applications. And in PowerBuilder 2018, we'll be introducing new C# capabilities. And those C# capabilities will be in the Cloud Edition, not in the Standard. And of course, the Cloud Edition includes everything that you have in Standard, plus the cloud-specific features that I mentioned. Now, the Universal Edition includes everything in Standard and Cloud, but also adds support for the Power Server Web and Mobile solution, which allows you to take existing PowerBuilder applications and rapidly move them to a mobile device or into a web browser, and running, of course, in a cloud-based environment on .NET. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and he's going to go into giving you the hands-on look at some of the new features of PowerBuilder 2017 R2, as well as following that up with some tech advice.
Thanks, Armin. Hi, Chris Pollack, Director of Developer Relations here. Just continuing on with the hands-on look. First of all, before we go, I'm really pumped up on this release because if we look at the second point that Armin just went through on the previous slide, notice we have here the web service client available here in the Standard Edition. That means that now you can consume client web services from the Standard Edition. That means Easy SOAP, the .NET version of SOAP, and of course the new RESTful capabilities as well as JSON as well. And if it's in Standard, that means also everybody that has Cloud and the Universal Edition also gets that as well, which is just great in my opinion. I did a little research yesterday and I was looking at PowerBuilder 11.5, which was released in 2008, and 12.6, which was 2014. And if you look at the average to 11.5 to 12 to 12.5 to 12.6, there was a 3-year gap before you saw any new features on average. Now, what we're doing is between 2017 and 2017 R2, in just basically 7 months, 6 months development, 1 QA, we've given you a whole bunch of new features in 6 months. So let's have a look, first of all, at one of the new features, which is the new integrated Git and SVN source code control integration. So if we look back at the old days, we can still connect to these source code managers and other ones, commercial ones in the industry. But typically, we go directly through the client or we go through a third-party proxy to be able to do that. And this is nice. It's sort of like the database realm. You can go direct to the database management system called the native driver, or you can go through what we call middleware. And this is middleware in the middle. And of course, if you go through middleware, typically you suffer performance or handicap functionality like you would, for example, in ODBC or OLEDB. And that, but if you could talk directly to the database, it's a lot better. So we give you that capability here in this release. So now what we're going to do is we're going to eliminate those middle 2 pieces so you can talk directly from the IDE to SVN or Git. You have compatibility with the latest versions of those source code managers. And it automatically creates directories for you automatically. So you don't have to do that manually like you used to do before. And you don't have to create, well, a lot of people created a Windows folder for every PowerBuilder library. You don't need to do that anymore either. And you don't, of course, have to use that third-party plugin, which may or may not work properly because it's emulating the Microsoft SCC API. So that PowerBuilder thinks that it's dealing with a Microsoft source code manager, but it's not. It's going to whatever one that you're using. Installation of the source code management client is optional. However, I would certainly recommend it because there's a lot of great features that you may want to tap into. So let's have a look at a demo at this point. You'll notice here, if on my system, I actually have two of them installed here. I have the Visual SVN and I have the Tortoise SVN. I did test the Git one, but I tested three, the Git, Tortoise, and Visual here in beta testing. The one I'm going to use today is the Visual SVN. And so if I just bring up the console, this is what it looks like when you first install the server. I'm using the free standard edition, by the way, and this is great for supporting small to medium-sized project teams. The enterprise edition allows you to do things like integrate with Active Directory, but that is a paid version of the software. But I've been using this one for over a decade. So the key is when you bring up the console after you install it, whether you use Git or use another version of SVN, the first thing you need to do is create a repository. And I've already done that. You notice I just used the right-hand mouse button, create repository, and I've got the Appeon repository ready to go. And then under users, I registered myself as Chris. So once you get a repository done, you notice you can copy that URL to the clipboard, which I can do. And then you would return back to the PowerBuilder IDE. So here we are in 2017 R2. I've got a little test application here. The trick is, instead of a right-hand mouse button, go to Properties, go to Add Source Control. Now you can choose SVN or Git. And then, of course, what you need to do is, because I copied that repository address, I paste that in as the URL, and then I just specify my user ID and password, and I hit Test Connection here, and you can see Visual SVN responding OK. If you hit OK, you'll notice on the bottom left-hand side, it's preparing to add the source control. It's giving you a list of objects that you would like at this point. Again, you can check or uncheck things here, and I'm just going to hit OK. And it's going to go and build the source code. Let me go to the file folder at this point. Notice that in that working folder where my PowerBuilder project is, it's built a new folder called .svn and WS objects. So this is where your local copy of your objects is maintained at this point. Notice at the bottom left-hand side, it says adding the source control was successful. So if I go back to my console and I expand that, you can see here CIP test, which is the folder that I'm actually working on. There's my objects. Nice thing I like about the native interface that the source code control proxy didn't do, it didn't add my PowerBuilder libraries. I had to do that manually through the client. So this is done automatically now using the native interface, which is really cool. And then of course, as far as the objects are concerned, now you can start to see from here at the different objects, the SRA for an application source, or SRU for a user object, SRD here, for example, for a data window, is automatically been added here. And you can see that here in the master console. Notice at this point, if I expand what I'm doing, you'll notice here that I have the green dots here on the left-hand side. So these objects have been registered. The target and the various objects have been registered to the source code control. If I use the right-hand mouse button at this point, well, you'll see it's a little bit different. That we have some new menus here. It'll say either Git commit or Git update if you're connected to Git, or in this case, it'll be SVN because that's where I'm connected at the moment. And the interesting thing is that most of you in the older way of doing it would want to do a checkout at this point, which is what we call an SVN lock. Now, if you do that, notice that the message comes up and says this feature, which is called pessimistic locking from the database perspective, will be available in R3. And yes, R3 is within 6 months of where I'm talking to you. So I'll be back in 6 months to show you all about that. Notice, for example, if I open the application object, let's say, for example, I'll just use my handy utility here to actually build a heading for a comment heading here, and I do a save. Everything's happy at this point. If you don't like it, you can use the right-hand mouse button and you can revert it back. You can post updates to the server if you want at any time, so that anybody else can see your current logic. When you want to check it back in, that's an SVN commit at that point. And as soon as you do that, then it'll actually check the code in. It'll ask you why you did that. I did that because I was on a webinar. They made me do it. And you can see here, it now turns to a green dot in the top left-hand side of the system tree. Everything's checked in. And if you went to the client, you would actually see the changes reflected at that point on the client. All right. So let's have a look at the next new feature. That's the HTTP client, and that supports the TLS of 1.2. So I'm going to return back here to my PowerBuilder IDE, and I'm going to flip over to another target here called REST demo, and we can actually run that at this point. In my little notepad here, I have some text. I'll just paste that in. And what that's actually going to do is going to call the Google API, which is a RESTful web service. And I can hit translate here, and you can see it translated. PowerBuilder release number 2 is awesome. And I apologize in advance to my Spanish friends. El lanzamiento número 2 de PowerBuilder es asombroso. I hope I said that right. So that's actually calling the Google on the fly. And that for, well, to do it in French here. But there's just an example of how that was done. So let me open up my to-do list here, because I have a whole bunch of things to show you how that's actually been done. Let's have, first of all, a look at the declarations at this point. So I can do that on my to-do list, and I can see the instance variables. We can see at this point that the person who wrote this was one of our great support people, defined the new HTTP client, JSON parser, JSON generator, and RESTful client. I declared that as instance variables. If we go to the object browser, and we go to the system area, you'll notice, for example, here that we do have a new HTTP client. And there are functions available for that object. There are properties for that object. For example, the security protocol, it's a number, and some of the numbers refer to TLS 1.2 support, for example, that Armin mentioned. Some of them are secure socket layer 3.0 that Armin also mentioned, and you can put a timeout here, which is something that's really nice. If you're using the old INET object, which the HTTP client is basically an upgraded replacement for it, you couldn't, when you call the actual send command or post, you couldn't get handled back if they didn't respond. So now you can with this kind of thing here. If we look at the JSON series here, you can see that there's actually a JSON generator and a JSON parser added to the system class. And along with that, if we scroll down a little bit further, we might as well complete that while we've got this painter open. We have the RESTful client open as well. And that. So the RESTful client and the HTTP client are kissing cousins, and we'll explain the difference here very shortly. But I'm going to stick to the HTTP side at this point. Notice now that you've seen the declarations, so you just declare that they are from the system class. And if we actually go to the code that's actually running at this point, it's actually then calling the actual RESTful API. It's just doing a send request, and it's passing basically a JSON data set to that. And the JSON generator was used to do that. So what's happening here is anything that you enter here on the left-hand text box, multiple line edit, that's being generated into basically a JSON request. And that's being passed to the Google API. So you can see here we're doing a post. Actually, I'll zoom in on a bit so you can see that. We're doing a HTTP send request, a post to that URL. We provide a key and the JSON, which is basically the English. You know, PowerBuilder is awesome. Okay, that gets a response back, and at that point we look at the response and we see what's actually happened at this point. So that's how you use the new HTTP client. All right. Now notice I'm using here the ability here to actually go through my to-do list to show you all this. I wanted to put a little note here that I talk to a lot of people and they go, it's like, why would you ever use the to-do list? Well, anytime you're looking at something, that you can just say add linked, and it keeps adding it in there. And it remembers exactly what object you're looking at and where you scrolled. And it brings you back to that automatically when you do that. So it's really a nice thing to be able to do as a programmer, that I'd say, oh, tomorrow I need to remember to do this and I need to remember to do that. I can add it to my to-do list and I can come back tomorrow and pick that up. Okay, so there's an example there in the HTTP client. Notice that it has lots of new methods in it. It has properties to handle the TLS, secure socket layer, timeout, error handling is nice. And it is a kissing cousin to the RESTful client as well, which we'll talk about shortly. Again, the nice thing is they didn't touch the INET object. So for those people who have code running in production, nothing's changed there. The INET object is still there. You can let it continue to run. We're not going to take it out of the system, but you can slowly think about moving and instantiating the HTTP client instead of the INET object to do this. So there's the example of how to do that. The next one is the RESTful and JSON services. And in order to do this, we'll have a look at the new RESTful client. You can see it's in the system class. We have provided you a new JSON parser and generator object. And interesting enough, a JSON retrieve is also available here as well. Okay, so if we go back here to the object browser, and again, I go back to the system class and I have a look at the RESTful client because it looks like the HTTP client. You see the same properties here for the security protocol and the timeout. It has similar functions to the INET object HTTP, for example. You can post data here and you can get data. Nice thing is you can get the header from that. You can get a response information from here as well, similar to the HTTP. But here is basically the pièce de résistance, which is the, notice you can do a retrieve from here as well. So you can retrieve into a data store, you can retrieve into a data window, you can pass a string or blob data into the retrieve. It's an overloaded method to be able to do that and pass in the URL as well. So we'll explain the bonus of that here in the next demo. All right, in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return back here to actually the demo that I used here in the Elevate 2017 conference. And we'll run this little call web API. So those of you that were actually at the 2017 conference, you'll actually be able to see the same code here running, and we'll explain it again a little bit more. Okay, so it took a little bit there for my VM to kick in, but you can see here that the response to be able to actually go to a third middle tier RESTful web service, get a JSON data set back, which is what it looks like right here, and then drop it into the data windows. Pretty easy to do. And let's have a look at the code. So let me go to my to-do list here and actually have a look at the RESTful get. I can double click the to-do list here, and that should bring me back to the code. The key here is to actually do what you see here, which is a send get request and pass in the URL to that RESTful web service. The web service then returns me some data. So I do a get response data, and now I have in this PowerBuilder variable LS.JSON, the actual JSON result set. And then I call this method import data at the bottom here, passing in the JSON result set. Okay, so what do I need to do to handle that? It's pretty easy. Notice here that we have a JSON parser. Oops. And there we go. So notice here, all we need to do is just call the load method, pass in the JSON data string, and that loads it into the JSON parser. Then we call the item account, which basically is like the data window row count, that how many rows are in the JSON parser primary buffer. And you notice now it just goes into a loop. It does now an insert row on the data window, and then followed by for example, a get on the JSON parser and then a set into the data window buffer. And the same thing, a get from the JSON parser and then a set. And it just keeps on doing that in a loop, transferring. It's almost like copying data window buffer A to data window buffer B. So that's basically how this data window gets loaded here. And you notice that the work of actually parsing out all that JSON stuff is done by the JSON parser. If I reverse this loop and instantiated the JSON generator, it's the same thing, that I would go through a loop doing an add item that add to the actual JSON generator, and at the end I would just say get JSON or save to file. There are two methods there you can call, and voila, there's the actual JSON result set, which now you can send to whatever third-party tool that you want, either locally or on the web. So that's how that works. Okay. So now, interestingly enough, even though this is actually a version of PowerBuilder that that I showed back in September, I need to zoom in a bit. Notice that if I had not used, this example used the HTTP client. If I had used the RESTful client, which was not ready in September for me to show you, but if I instantiated that, which you can now do in R2, I could use the retrieve method, pass in the data window address and that same URL, and notice that I would not have to do that loop anymore. That the JSON data would be parsed out into the data window buffer with that one command. So there's a cool addition here for R2 that was added between September and when we went to beta back in December. So that's something I think is really a nice enhancement there on the RESTful generator. Now, not to be outdone, of course, you don't have to wait till PowerBuilder 2018. We're going to give you R3 in another 6 months. And notice that if you call the update command on a data window control or a data store, it'll also figure out how to actually get that data back to wherever it got it from. So very similar to like a store procedure. We're also going to give you new cryptographic hashing functions, and we're going to support the new security OAuth 2.0 as well. Again, that's coming in about another 6 months. So notice that the accelerated development here, not only did you we're talking 6 months from 2017 to R2. In between that, we delivered maintenance release number 1 in September, maintenance release number 2, which was the update to the Power Server Toolkit for Power Server 2017, and maintenance release number 3 gave you the multilingual pack for PowerBuilder 2017. So you've actually had 3 interim releases between regular GA and R2. So that just shows you how fast we're moving here to be able to give you the features that you need and not in the slow time frame that you've been used to in the older PowerBuilder versions. So we're using an agile methodology. All right, so the next thing is PostgreSQL. We've now given you an official ODBC driver for that. Gives you full DML functionality. Now you could connect before with ODBC, but we didn't have a driver that was tuned for it. So some DML commands may or may not have worked as expected. Nice thing now that we support full DML, store procedures, views, inline PowerScript, data window, SQL, whatever you want. And of course, because it's now official supported ODBC driver, if you have a problem, you can contact our techno support team. So let's have a look at the Postgres demo. Now, in order to do that, I'll bring up the Postgres admin console. So while I was testing here with R2, I was using Postgres SQL 9.6 and 10.0. So when you install one of those versions, those are the 2 of the most current versions, and they both worked well for me. The main thing is when you install it is right down here. You can see in the middle here in the lower section, the host name address, which is going to be either your DNS name of the server, local host, or the IP address. And another important thing is the port itself, 5432 in this case. Notice at this point, I use the right-hand mouse button. You have databases. I use the right-hand mouse button, and I created a database. And you can see here, if I expand that, there's Chris. If you go to the users, I created Chris as well as a user, and I flagged myself as super user, which is like a DBA, basically, to be able to do all that. Once I did that, I went to schemas, and I used the right-hand mouse button, and I created a schema. So I can create my own local schema just for me, for my testing, or I could create a public one. So in the public one, I also went down and I created a test table. and I created a view that's available as well. So once you've actually got PostgreSQL installed, now we just go back to the PowerBuilder IDE. I'll just close my previous work here, and I can just double click on my to-do list PostgreSQL, and notice it again, because I did an add linked, it automatically brought me back to exactly the same point in the database painter, because what I wanted to show you here is this connection called PostgreSQL Chris. So before I do that, let me go to the ODBC administrator. Let me look at the system DSN and have a look at the Postgres. Here's Postgres Chris. I would suggest that you install, at this point, when you install that, make sure that you install both the 32-bit and the 64-bit version of the client. I'm running a 64-bit server at this point, but the client's 32 and 64 are installed. Remember that if you're building 64-bit executables from PowerBuilder, or you're using PowerServer in a 64-bit IIS environment, that it'll connect to PostgreSQL using the 64-bit driver. So make sure you install both bitnesses when you do the Postgres installation, and that should do it for you. Now that I've created that, I went back here and I created a database profile. So this is exactly how you would have done it. You would have given it a name, you would have chosen the DSN, you would have put in the user ID and password, and then you would actually connect at that point. So if you do that, and this is right out of the box, you're going to have a couple of problems. So here's a couple of advanced tech tips. The catalog tables could not be created. Okay, so I've seen that before. I don't have DBA access, and I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. I do have DBA access. So if I go to tables, for example, and I drag it here, I can see the table itself graphically. If I go to get the data, I can't get the data. I'm thinking, oh, okay, wait a minute. I'm a super user here. I should be able to do this. So here's a couple of tips for you. First of all, go back to the actual definition and make sure that when you go to system, that you can type in public or Chris, for example, because Chris is a super user. So public or Chris would work fine. The next thing you need to go is to the syntax. And this is exactly the way the profile is built by default. You need to go to enclosed table and column names in quotes. That you notice here is no, yes, and the default when you first build it in PowerBuilder is I'm not sure, which does nothing for you. So make sure you go back here and make sure you turn that into a check mark. We're going to hit OK at this point, and we're going to reconnect. Boom. Now when we look at the tables, we still see the table. We can go back and edit the data. Notice there's no problems. We can use the ISQL pane here. There'll be no problems whatsoever. If I go to the main console, however, and I look at the tables here, the main console, and I'll refresh that, notice that there's the PBCat column, edit, format, table, validation, which are, of course, the extended attributes that you can now use. Notice only one user needs to log in with like super public to create these. Once these tables are created, other users don't have to have that kind of designation, the power to be able to do that. But the first guy who connects, you notice that the IDE will want to create those tables. And once they're created, this would have been disabled when I first came in. Now you can see the extended attributes are enabled. And we can go here, use the right-hand mouse button at any time and add display formats, edit style, and validations like all good programmers should be doing. And that now using, of course, the PostgreSQL. So for some technical advice, I've been able to give you some of Chris Pollock words of wisdom and my journey through the beta program to be able to figure this all out. So the other thing I wanted to mention here, just in this slide, is to go back here to the PowerBuilder IDE. We'll have a look at the contents, and we'll have a look here at the what's new. And so notice in the what's new here, one of the things I wanted to mention here is that the PowerBuilder compiler has been enhanced. So not all the information from all the tab pages of the project were actually conveyed to the external compiler. We've now fixed that in this release, so now everything you choose in all the different tab pages, it generates a parameter that can be used. So that should help a lot. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that the native PDF generation has been enhanced. So you'll notice here in my native PDF, in my to-do list here, it'll bring up a data window. And in the data window, you'll notice here that if I scroll over a little bit, I'm just going to shrink that down here because my console is cutting that off, that will go to the data export tab here. So once you're in the data export and you go to PDF, of course, we're used to distill or we're used to native PDF, which is great. However, you'll notice now in R2, you have the ability to do PDF conformance. So you can specify the ISO level that you want, A1A, A1B, 3A, B, or U. So if we go back here to my file manager, you'll notice here that I actually went and created a PDF. And I had actually set that to PDF 1A. And now if I open that in the Adobe Reader, there's one thing that you can see right away. And you can see here that Adobe informs me that it tells you the PDA ISO standard that this PDF was generated. So I know it was working here. So if you need that kind of ISO compliance, you have it here in this new feature. The other thing that you can do here, which is new, is notice that you can actually use these settings. So normally what you would do in 2017, you would specify the paper size and the landscape portrait. Now you can say, just hit this check mark and we'll pick it up automatically from the print specifications. You don't have to worry about that. So as the print specifications change, the PDF generation will basically follow along with it at that point. The other thing worthwhile, just before I finish off here in this section, under the what's new, that for the PDF generation, is the image format. That's what I wanted. So you notice here now that you don't see it in the properties pane of the data window, but under program control, you can use a modify command or the dot notation, and you can actually change the actual image from a default bitmap to JPEG, PNG, or GIF. So this allows you to control the clarity of the image inside the embedded PDF, or the size of the entire PDF by changing it from the default, which is bitmap, if you don't do anything. So that was added as well, that I thought might be noteworthy at this point to point along. Okay, so installation suggestions here. Make sure you have local admin rights. That may be also controlled by group policies. Check with your network people, security people. Again, I already said, install both bitnesses of the client side of the database drivers. Now that we're calling or giving you the ability to call a SOAP and SOAP.NET web services and RESTful web services in the standard edition, make sure that when you install R2, no matter what edition you have, make sure you install the Windows SDK, because if you use the SOAP.NET or the RESTful, it's going to call the WSDL compiler. And you're going to need those compilers that are only available in the SDK. Also make sure that you have the appropriate .NET 4.x installed. I'm using the Windows 10 Fall Creator Edition today. So actually, I'm actually running .NET 4.7 on everything that I do here today. If you're using the Cloud or Universal Edition, make sure, again, you've got the right .NET framework installed and that it's configured to be used inside of IIS, okay? If you're deploying web services to IIS or in Universal Edition, you also could be using PowerServer Mobile as well. That's going to need the .NET version of that if you're running the .NET version of PowerServer. Okay, and just a nice friendly tip, when the IDE is building web services or it's communicating from the PowerServer toolkit to external resources, instead of getting the prompt all the time, is it okay to go and run this? Is it okay to go and run this? If you just run the IDE as administrator, you won't keep getting those prompts all the time as you're going through the deploy process. So there's a little tip for you as well. So migration considerations, and that, again, we mentioned that before, that going from PowerBuilder from Sybase or SAP, they encompassed a third-party utility called the TX control, and now we use the TE control as the third-party control. Our wrapper is the same as far as the rich text control or the rich text data window, but there are some subtle changes between basically the framework, the engine and transmission inside the car that we call is a little bit different. So there are some subtle differences between the TX engine and the TE engine. So make sure you read the help file carefully. If you're coming from version 12, from 2017 to 2017 R2, you've probably already done this. But if you're coming from an older version, that's where you want to make sure you check that out. Notice, of course, WinForm and WPF applications are not supported anymore because PowerBuilder.net is no longer. Therefore, you have to think about basically refactoring those apps back into PowerBuilder 2017, which is basically the client classic interface. If you use the web form feature, you can easily replace that with a little bit of refactoring using PowerServer Web, which is another option to be able to use. Converting EA server non-visual objects, you can either instantiate them client-side and run them, because EA server, of course, is now end of life, or you can convert those fairly easily with some refactoring to non-visual objects that are deployed as web services to IIS. And then basically you're changing the Corba calls in your client that went to EA server to web service calls, which again, notice now the standard edition can do that for you as well. If you're migrating from older versions, notice that there's a migration guide at tinyurl.com, and then just tag it in as PB 2017 migration. And that will give you a whole bunch of things to think about when you're migrating to that particular version. And notice that we also have a video that you can watch on tinyurl as well called PB 2017 migration video that will help you out as well. So I just wanted to mention that there's free technical resources. There's Appeon University, the community itself, listing, you can see on the middle here, the nice pictures of Bruce and Matt and Roland and John and Yakov and Olan, that's the one I'm missing. Thanks to those MVPs, when you post your questions on the Appeon community, those guys typically, one of them will jump in very quickly, or some of our other great people that scan the community and give you a hand as quick as they can. Notice also on our Appeon website, that's changed, that as far as the roadmap. We've now got the ability to click on, for example, different releases and give you a more detailed list of what's coming from 20 to R3 to 2018 to 2019 and then post 2019 as well. And we'll be updating that as things progress as well.